Mr. President, I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection. Morning business is now closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the consideration of H.R. 2354, which the clerk will now report.
Calendar number 157, H.R. 2354, an act making appropriations for energy and water development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I ask that the reading be vitiated, and it has been. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm very pleased to introduce the fiscal year 2012 energy and water development appropriations on behalf of my ranking member, the distinguished Senator Alexander, with whom I've had the great pleasure of working. And I just want to say this up front. It's been really a pleasure to work with this particular ranking member. He's respected, he's credible, he's direct, and he's reasonable, which I have learned is an endangered species around here, so I very much appreciate that. This energy and water bill has an allocation of $1.625 billion, which is $57 million, or 0.1% below last year's enacted levels, and nearly $3 billion, or 9.4% below the President's request. The $31.625 billion is split between security and non-security funding, consistent with the Budget Control Act of 2011. The Budget Control Act established caps on discretionary spending over 10 years, with separate caps for security and non-security spending. Now, this becomes relevant, as I will explain. The security allocation for energy and water is $11.05 billion. The $11.05 billion funds only 4 programs under the National Nuclear Security Administration called NNSA: nuclear weapons, nonproliferation, naval reactors, and the Office of the Administrator. I'd like to point out right up front that funding for the NNSA makes up a growing portion of this bill. Last year, the NNSA made up 30% of the total allocation. This year, it has increased to 35%. And in addition, because of the Budget Control Act, a firewall is created between security and non-security funding, so you can't transfer funding back and forth. No funding from the NNSA can be used to fund energy and water projects, and no funds from energy and water can be used to fund the National Nuclear Security Administration. While funding increases for the National Security Administration help advance national security priorities, it comes at the expense of water and energy projects in the rest of our bill. Our non-security allocation, which funds the Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation under the Department of Interior, and the Department of Energy, is $20.575 billion. While our security allocation grew by $528 million, or 5%, the non-security allocation is $584 million, or 2.8% less than FY11, and $3.5 billion, or 17% less than fiscal year 2010. So you can see the crunch that's put on one part of the budget, and the other part of our appropriation bill has actually expanded. As I mentioned, the security allocation is $11.05 billion, which is an increase of $528 million, or 5%. So this is an increase of $1.163 billion, or close to 12%, for the security portion of this appropriation bill. Now, to clarify, NNSA is responsible for 3 primary national security missions. First, maintaining the safety, security, and reliability of the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. Second, responsibility for reducing the threat of nuclear terrorism through non-proliferation programs. And third, it designs and builds nuclear reactors for safe and effective nuclear propulsion for aircraft carriers and submarines in the United States Navy. Taking into account competing funding priorities for national security activities, I think this bill strikes as good a balance as it can between funding for nuclear weapons modernization and reducing the threat of nuclear proliferation. The nuclear weapons program under the bill would see an increase of $294 million, or 4.2%, above FY11. With $7.2 billion, the NNSA, which is the agency of concern, will be able to meet the highest priorities of the nuclear posture review and modernization activities discussed during negotiations of the New START Treaty. These are three primary activities. First, funds will continue for life extension programs for the W-76 submarine-launched warhead, the B-61 bomb, and the W-78 intercontinental ballistic missile warhead. Second, funds allow for completing design work for two aging nuclear facilities that may need to be replaced to meet modern safety standards. One for handling plutonium at Los Alamos National Lab, and the other for uranium at the Y-12 facility in Tennessee. Third, funds will maintain the science, technology, and engineering base to continue assessing the safety, security, and reliability of the nuclear weapons stockpile. The Non-Proliferation Program would see an increase of $109 million, or 4.7% above FY11. NNSA would stay on track to meet its goal to secure and remove the most vulnerable nuclear materials for around the world by the end of 2013. These are materials that could be used by terrorists to build nuclear devices. The United States has already removed 3,086 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, 120 nuclear weapons worth of material from dozens of countries. NNSA would also be able to continue deploying portal monitors at seaports and border crossings to detect nuclear smuggling and help countries increase security at nuclear facilities. The United States has installed radiation detection equipment at more than 399 sites across the world. Finally, the security allocation will be used to fund the Naval Reactors Program that provides propulsion for the country's submarines and aircraft carriers. An increase of $141 million, or 14.6%, above fiscal year's 11, is directed to help design a nuclear reactor that will last 40 years for ballistic missile submarines, the most survivable leg of our nuclear deterrent. Turning to non-security funding, as I mentioned earlier, our allocation is $20.575 billion, $584 million, or 2.8% less than fiscal year 2011. With this significant decrease in funding, the bill focuses its limited non-security funding on the highest priorities: critical water infrastructure projects and accelerating energy technologies. Let me speak for a moment about water infrastructure. The Corps of Engineers would receive $4.864 billion. That's an increase of $7 million, or 0.1% above FY 2011, and $291 million, or 5.9% above the President's request. And here's why. The Corps of Engineers, I strongly believe, is responsible for such a wide array of projects: building, maintaining, repairing locks, levees, dams, dredging for waterway navigation, devastating floods and hurricanes in the last few months that have damaged many communities across the United States are a stark reminder of why Corps of Engineers infrastructure projects remain such a high congressional priority. With a ban on congressionally directed projects, or as is not so fondly called earmarks, Congress cannot direct needed funding to projects that may have been overlooked by the administration or to address emerging needs after the President's budget submission. The President's FY12 budget request did not include more than 100 studies and projects for navigation, flood control, and environmental restoration that the administration included in the FY 2012 work plan. Without funding in 2012, these studies and projects will likely be suspended. I think that's important to keep in mind. While our bill does not fund any new projects, our bill provides $291 million above the President's request to support these ongoing studies and projects for the Corps that were either unfunded or underfunded in the President's budget request. The bill also provides the Department of the Interior $1.067 billion, $27 million, or 2.5% less than fiscal year 2011, but still $16 million, 1.4% more than the President's request. Funding for the Department of Interior includes the Bureau of Reclamation, which is responsible for oversight and operation of water projects related to irrigation, water supply, hydroelectric power generation in the 17 western states. Finally, the bill provides $1.045 billion in disaster relief funding, and I want to speak about that. This is on top of our base allocation to repair damaged Corps of Engineers owned, operated, or inspected infrastructure from flooding on the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and other natural disasters. This level of funding covers damages the Corps identified when the committee reported this bill. As I mentioned during committee markup, we know this amount is insufficient based on the number and severity of natural disasters that have occurred this year. The Corps has updated their disaster needs, and we will be working throughout the floor process to ensure that increased funding to address disaster recovery needs is provided. I think both the ranking member and I, our subcommittee, and the Appropriations Committee as a whole understands that responding to these disaster needs is of the highest priority. Regarding clean energy, the bill provides stable funding to support science, technology, and engineering programs to advance clean energy technologies. It provides the Office of Science $4.84 billion, the same as in 2011. The Office of Science conducts basic research in physics, chemistry, biology to improve our understanding of energy and matter. New discoveries will advance energy technologies. Our bill focuses the limited resources of the Office of Science toward the highest priorities, which include material support, developing the next generation of biofuels, and maintaining United States leadership in high-performance computing. Our bill continues to fund 3 hubs, which are research centers made up of scientists and engineers from the national labs, universities, and private industry to address a specific energy challenge. The 3 hubs focus on developing fuels that can be produced directly from sunlight, improving energy efficiency of existing buildings, and using modeling and simulation tools to improve the operation of nuclear reactors. Our bill also funds a new hub, the fourth hub, to improve batteries for electric vehicles and for storage of wind, solar, and other intermittent power sources, something the ranking member was very much interested in, and I was very pleased to agree. In addition to the Office of Science, the bill also provides $250 million for ARPA-E, an increase of $70 million, or 39%. Now, ARPA-E funds new and innovative energy technologies that would significantly reduce our dependence on foreign oil and reduce carbon emissions. ARPA-E's goal is to demonstrate the feasibility of new technology and then find a private company to commercialize the technology. As a sign of early success in attracting private investment, last year ARPA-E awarded a startup company $750,000 to demonstrate its new innovative technology related to energy storage. An early demonstration of this startup's new technology has already attracted $12 million in private investment to help commercialize it. I think that's good news. While the government continues to invest in innovative energy technologies, nuclear energy continues to provide 20% of the nation's electricity, but it's 70% of its carbon-free electricity. This, to me, is a stunning figure, that it's 20% of all power, but 70% of carbon-free power. Currently, nuclear energy will continue to be an important source of energy for us in the future. However, I deeply believe that before we expand nuclear power in the United States, we must address our spent fuel situation in order to limit the government's liability from its failure to take this waste. Today, high-level nuclear spent fuels are stored at 74 locations, most directly adjacent to an active reactor. The fuel remains in either spent fuel pools or dry casks meant to be temporary, but in reality, now forever. There is simply no place to put it. To date, the United States government has paid out $1 billion to the nuclear industry because of its failure to take custody of this fuel as required by law. Few people know this. This liability will grow to $15.4 billion by 2020 and another $500 million for each year of delay after 2020. Mr. President, my distinguished ranking member, we simply have to get cracking and find either regional repositories or a central waste disposal place where nuclear waste can be stored essentially forever. The United States is responsible for 65,000 tons of spent fuel at these 74 sites. This is enough material to cover one football field 20 feet deep, and our liability continues to grow. According to the Blue Ribbon Commission, if no nuclear reactors are built and the existing fleet of 104 reactors operate until the end of their license, the total inventory of spent fuel by 2050 would be 150,000 metric tons. That's 2.5 times as much as we have now. The current absence of a spent fuel policy and a repository to store spent nuclear fuel is unacceptable and unsustainable. For these reasons, this bill takes the first step in requiring the Department of Energy to create a strategy for spent fuel storage, including options for consolidating and storing spent fuel at one or more regional sites. With regard to funding for the nuclear energy program, the bill provides $584 million. That's a reduction of $142 million, or 24%. Available funding will focus more on safety and the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle. For example, the bill provides $52 million, that's an increase of $12 million from 2011, to accelerate development of new cladding materials for nuclear fuel that reduce the likelihood of meltdowns and hydrogen explosions, which were observed at Fukushima. And I believe as more becomes available about what actually happened at Fukushima and the after effect of Fukushima, cladding material is going to become much more significant. In closing, I would again like to thank my colleague and ranking member, Senator Alexander, for working with me in a cooperative and constructive manner to draft this bill. We have developed, I believe, a well-balanced and responsible bill that addresses the water infrastructure, energy, and national security needs of this nation. And I hope every senator can support the bill, and I hope we can conclude floor action in a timely manner. I yield the floor to my distinguished ranking member.
Mr. President.
The senator from Tennessee.
I thank the distinguished senator from California. She is a delight to work with. Without disparaging any other member of the Senate, it's nice to work with former mayors or county executives or even governors, because we're accustomed to making decisions and talking directly and coming to a result. And that's what we're able to do. And even when we disagree, which we sometimes do, we're able to keep working on these issues and still try to come to a result. So it's a real privilege to work with Senator Feinstein. I thank her greatly for her courtesy and her directness and her diligence. For example, last week we spent an hour and a half on a really very small part of this budget. Actually, it's not even part of the budget, but it's a related matter, just making sure that we understood from all sides the issues. And it wasn't done, I don't think, in the whole hour and a half. There was never a Republican comment or a Democratic comment. We were just trying to find out, what was the right thing to do for our country, which is the goal of each of us, I think. There's no need, Mr. President, for me to repeat what the chairman has said, and said very, very accurately. I'd like to summarize and comment on a few of the points. I'd like to highlight the areas of agreement we have, which are, for the most part, a couple of areas where we have different points of view, which we're still working on. She emphasized, and I thought it was important to emphasize, that except for disaster spending, this energy and water bill is slightly below the spending levels of last year. When you add in disaster funding, which I'll talk more about in just a minute, it's above that level. And there is no mandatory spending in the bill. Sometimes our bills get complicated by what we call around here automatic or mandatory spending. It's included within our appropriations bill. Some of us wonder why, since we can't do anything to change it in the appropriations process, but it's there. There's not any of that here. And as the senator emphasized, our bill is divided into two major parts. There's the security part, the defense part, and there's the non-security part, the non-defense part. And the security part is up. We're spending more. And the reason for that is that we, in the first place, ask the leaders of the committee to reallocate some money toward our committee so that we could try to live up as much as we could to our commitment to fund nuclear weapons modernization, an important issue that came up when the Senate ratified the New START Treaty. In other words, the New START Treaty was about limiting the number of nuclear weapons here and in Russia. Doing. So we made a commitment to try to go to certain levels, and we're moving in that direction. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's one reason, perhaps the main reason, why we spend more on the security part. And on the non-security part, as the Senator said, except for disaster spending, it's down. We're spending 3% less than we did before. I want to say a word about disaster funding. In the Budget Control Act in August, subject of great debate around here, one of the things that was done was to create a formula over the last 10 years that determines how much money we may be able to spend on disasters. The thought was that disaster spending, like other emergency spending, was getting out of control, and we need to think about it. Obviously, whenever there's a flood or a hurricane or a terrible disaster, we rush to help, but that's real money too, and it has to come from somewhere. So this formula that was created says that during this fiscal year that we're now in, the one that's about a month and a half old, that we may spend about $11.3 billion based on spending over the last 10 years. And after that, we'll have to reduce spending somewhere if we're going to spend more on disasters. Well, with respect to disaster relief, our bill's part of that is in the Corps of Engineers. And we moved quickly in our subcommittee and in the Appropriations Committee to deal with the epic flooding that the Senator described on the Mississippi and on the Missouri River this past year, which in some cases exceeded the flood heights from the massive 1927 and 1933 floods. Just to give you an idea of how unusual these floods were, at our meeting of the Environmental and Public Works Committee 2 or 3 weeks ago, 14 United States senators of both parties came to the committee to say to the authorizing committee, the EPW committee, that we needed to do more to deal with the floods. 14 United States senators. I've never seen that many senators testifying before a committee before on behalf of any subject. That's how much we are concerned about it, and that's how much people in the areas affected are concerned about it. So in the Appropriations Committee, we had a discussion about how much of that disaster funding to fund. And we recommended $1.04 billion, and there was an amendment by the senator from Missouri, I believe, who said it needs to be more because we know it's going to be more than that. And we said in a bipartisan way, I remember the chairman, the ranking member, said we don't have the estimates definite yet from the Corps of Engineers or from FEMA, so we're only going to fund those areas that are declared to be presidential disasters, number one, and where we have definite estimates, number two. And when we have more definite estimates of additional damage, we will recommend the funding of that. So we defeated the amendment offered by the senator from Missouri with the promise that as real damage estimates come in, they will be met. Well, the senator and I will be offering an amendment to address this increase, and I want my colleagues to be aware of this because particularly on our side of the aisle, we've had a good deal of discussion about funding for disaster. In the amendment that we'll be offering, part of the money fits within the agreed formula that we agreed to in the Budget Control Act. About $550 million will not, and we'll have to find some other place in the budget to reduce spending in order to properly fund this disaster spending. But I doubt there's any senator who won't want to fund that because this is spending to be prepared for the next disaster. This will be money for preparedness, for sandbags, and I can guarantee you that if the Missouri and the Mississippi flood next year and the sandbags aren't available because we couldn't find the money from somewhere else, there will be 28 senators at the next meeting of the Environmental and Public Works Committee, not just 14. So this is an urgent request, and we are suggesting a way to reduce spending. So with the disaster funding, which is the only thing that drives our total recommendations above last year's spending, we are, number one, staying within the cap created by the Budget Control Committee, and number two, for the amount of money for the sandbags and other preparedness, we're going to recommend a way to reduce spending somewhere else in order to be prepared for the next flood. With respect to the security allocation, Senator Feinstein mentioned that One part of our budget has to do with national security. Another part has to do with non-security. When most people, when they think of the Energy Department, don't think of the national security parts, but it's among the most important national defense requirements that we have. As she said, it includes modernizing all of our nuclear weapons to make sure they work, and it includes trying to make sure that nuclear weapons don't spread around the world. That usually stands right up at the top, those two items of our national defense posture. Now, there was a letter that came from members of the House of Representatives that seemed to be critical of the Senate for using, for, quote, defense money given to water-related projects. And I just want to clear that up. There must have been some confusion over on the other side of the Capitol, because under the rules of the Budget Control Committee, you can't use defense money for water projects, period. That's against the law. Not only did we not do it, we couldn't do it if we wanted to. In fact, we came up with $100 million more for nuclear weapons modernization than the House did. So perhaps the House letter was sent to the wrong address. Should have been sent over on that side of the aisle and not sent to the senators. In other words, we understand very well we shouldn't be using defense money for water projects or water project money for defense money, and we haven't done that. We're not allowed to do that. We can't cut weapons to fund water projects. Now, we, as I said earlier, Senator Feinstein and I and Senator Cochran, Senator Inouye all said we would support the President's request for appropriate funding for nuclear weapons modernization, which is why Senator Feinstein and I asked our ranking member and chairman to allocate more money to the security side of our budget, and they did that. And as a result of that, security spending for weapons activities is up 5%, $100 million more than the House was able to provide their version of the energy and water appropriations. It is the single largest percentage increase compared to all appropriations subcommittees with security spending in the budget. But it is still $400 million less than the President's full request and $400 million less than I would like to see spent on nuclear weapons modernization. I'm concerned about that. So I'm committed to continue to work with the full committee, the House, the administration, to come as close as we possibly can to the President's number on nuclear weapons modernization. But I want to make it clear that we have bent over backwards to make it a top priority or the top priority to begin with, and have had good cooperation from the senior members of our committee. Senator Feinstein's worked hard to put this bill together in a fair and accommodating manner. She mentioned the Office of Science and talked about clean energy. Recently, I was at one of our national laboratories in Sandia in New Mexico, and the director of science there reminded me, this is what he said: almost every major physical and biological invention of any importance in the United States since World War II has been funded by government-sponsored research, almost all through our 17 or 18 national laboratories or our 50 or 60 top research universities. These are our real secret weapons for job growth. It was out of the laboratories and out of this kind of government research came the Internet, the Human Genome Project, nuclear power itself, whether it's nuclear weapons or the 104 civilian reactors or the 104 reactors that run our Navy ships. The stealth technology came from this. It's hard to think of any major invention or discovery in physical or biological sciences that didn't have some government-sponsored research. So when we talk about spending the same amount of money this year that we did last year for the Office of Science, we're talking about a major effort of any jobs bill that the United States Senate could possibly pass. We're talking about jobs growth. This is a very big, important part of it. I mean, low taxes are some, fewer regulations are some, the right national labor relations policy are some, but any pro-growth plan for the United States of America has to include government-sponsored research. No other country in the world has anything like our 18 laboratories or our 50 or 60 top research universities, and if we want a high standard of living, we still produce about 25% of all the money in the world, we would do well to invest every spare dollar we've got there, as long as it was wisely spent. So as long as we're cutting over here, I'm all for that. I don't want to see a situation where we have runaway entitlement spending, and as a result of that, we squeeze the inventions that give us the job growth we need. I made a speech at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in 2008 where I suggested we have a new Manhattan Project for clean energy independence, focusing on electric cars and trucks, carbon capture, solar power, nuclear waste, advanced biofuels, green buildings, fusion. I'm a big supporter of research as an appropriate role for the federal government, and we'll talk more as we have time over the next 2 days, I hope, about the wisdom of the proper priorities in the spending. I would say yes to more for research and no to more for subsidies. The New York Times had a big article on Saturday where it talked about rich subsidies powering solar and wind projects, and these are for companies that can pay us back. I mean, these are extravagant subsidies, which I think are completely unnecessary, particularly at a budget time like this. If we have any extra dollars, let's put it into the secret weapons, the research universities and the national laboratories, and tackle the big challenges like the 500-mile battery for cars or finding a solar panel that's so cheap that it's $1 per kilowatt installed. I agree with Senator Feinstein that Senator Chu is on the right track with his energy hubs. I was suggesting in my remarks that we pick these grand challenges like use nuclear fuel as one. What to do? Where do we dispose of the waste? And Dr. Chu is doing that with batteries, with solar, with others, and I think it's a good way to concentrate the focus of the federal government and the Energy Department to solve the problems of rising gasoline prices and electricity prices, and to do it in a way that helps clean the air. So during our debate, I hope we have a chance to talk about more for research and less for permanent subsidies in the energy area, and I hope we have a way to talk about restraining entitlement spending so we can have sufficient funds to fund our secret weapons that have produced almost every major biological and physical discovery since World War II. You know, we have broad support for that here. We passed the America Competes Act in 2007, which set a path out for funding for sciences. We had 35 Democrats and 35 Republicans co-sponsors of that bill. It was introduced by the Democratic leader and the Republican leader, and when we changed parties after an election, it was introduced by the Republican leader and the Democratic leader. So we have bipartisan support for that. We need to make sure it's part of the debate. The Corps of Engineers, the Senator talked about. Those are critical ideas. Now, those are the areas that she and I agree on. I'll spend just a moment, if I may, on some areas that we have, let's say, some more work to do on before we have an agreement. And one is in the area of nuclear power. Here's what I agree with her about nuclear power. One is that it is a remarkable statistic that 40% of our electricity is produced by one of our greatest inventions, nuclear power, and that it's 70% of our electricity without carbon, but also without nitrogen or sulfur or mercury. Mercury pollution. We had a big debate here in the Senate last week about clean air. Well, if all our power were nuclear power, like almost all of it is in France, we wouldn't have a clean air debate, because our power plants wouldn't be producing any mercury, and they wouldn't be producing any nitrogen or sulfur as well as sulfur oxides as well as carbon. So nuclear is a remarkable advantage of the United States, and one which we should continue to take advantage of. I'm disappointed that we do not fund in this bill the first steps of a several-year program to jumpstart the small nuclear reactor program. This is not just our idea. France, Russia, Brazil, other countries around the world are working on this. There are 60 countries who want to introduce nuclear energy onto their grid for the first time. We have phenomenon like South Korea building a nuclear power plant for the United Arab Emirates. So if we don't do it, that doesn't mean no one will do it. It just means we'll be at the back of the line in a technology we invented and that today produces 20% of our electricity and 70% of our clean electricity. Now, the we're talking about are these smaller reactors. We already produce a lot of small reactors for the more than 100 Navy vessels, but they're of a little different kind. But small reactors that might be 100 to 300 megawatts, they'd be cheaper, they'd be made in the United States, they could be put together like Lego blocks would. They could be hauled back and forth from wherever they were produced to different places. They might be especially useful on a military base or around a national laboratory where you don't need a 1,200 new megawatts of electricity. And they might be better for an investor-owned utility to buy because they would only have to spend 1/4 or 1/5 or 1/6 as much money. And the big reactors that we now build are $5, $6, $7, $8 billion or even more. Quite a big number. So the President and Dr. Chu have recommended that we move ahead with a small reactor program. The House of Representatives agree. I agree. We're trying to work a way out here that we can join that parade. In fact, lead the parade. I think the way to do it is to take seriously Senator Feinstein's concern about used nuclear fuel. She's exactly right. We have blindfolds on our eyes if we think that it's responsible for us to move ahead producing so much nuclear power, even if it is just a football field 20 feet deep, without a permanent place to put the residue. Now, it's safe to keep it there, in my opinion, and not just mine. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Secretary Chu, the President's Nobel Prize-winning energy secretary, says it's safe for 100 years. But what that says to me is that it's safe while we figure out the right way to dispose of it. And I'm convinced that with our scientists that we can figure out an even better way of disposing of it than does France, for example, which reprocesses nuclear fuel and then stores it there. I suspect that we'll be able in the next 10, 15 years to figure out a way to recycle, reuse nuclear fuel, reduce the waste by 95%, but we still will need a permanent place to store it. So what I'm committed to do, working with Senator Feinstein, and I'm delighted that she has this intense level of interest, is to work with her and Senator Bingaman and Senator Murkowski, the ranking members of the Energy Committee, to try to create an inexorable process toward a result on finding a proper place to store used nuclear fuel. I hope we can do that within a year. That doesn't mean we'll have all the decisions made, but it means that we could have, I believe, a process established that will produce a result. And I'm hoping at the same time we can move ahead with small nuclear reactors, because by 2020 the idea is we would only have 2 or 3. And between now and then, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would need this help in creating the proper license and approving the design and working through all the things that one has to do. It's going to have to do that anyway, because somebody will bring one over from Korea or France or Russia or Brazil, and they will apply for a license in the United States, and we'll be using their reactors instead of ours. Another area of disagreement is there's some provisions in the bill, which I won't go into at great length, but I don't think they belong in an appropriations bill with all respect. They're based on several recommendations of the 90-day commission created by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Since our bill was reported, the NRC has taken several steps to prioritize their recommendations. Of the 5 recommendations that are in language in our bill, the commission only considered 1 to be of that urgent a priority. It's going to do the rest of them in the regular order of things. I think we should let our experts do their job. Perhaps this calls attention to the importance of it, but I would rather let the Nuclear Regulatory Commission do its job and us to concentrate our efforts on finding a place to put used nuclear fuel. One other area, I suspect within the next few days we'll have a discussion about the subsidy cost for renewable energy projects, but I think I'll delay that until we have an opportunity to discuss it on the floor and to have some discussions about the loan guarantee program, which hasn't worked as intended. I mean, the loan guarantee program was supposed to be to help put a priority on certain forms of energy and loan monies to companies who could pay it back. not to companies who couldn't pay it back. And apparently that's been an issue. There's also a provision in the bill about requiring grantees of the Department of Energy to change light bulbs in their factories if they don't meet the standards for the new light bulbs. This will be costly. It's inconsistent with current law. I hope we can remove it as the bill moves forward. But, Mr. President, in a bill this large and this important, I think Chairman Feinstein and the other members of the subcommittee and the full committee have come up with a good result, a result about which there is a consensus between us with very few areas of disagreement, a result that is below last year's spending levels except for disaster spending, and a result that gives a special emphasis to nuclear weapons modernization that we are committed to and that the President asked for, and that does better than the House number but still doesn't reach, I will acknowledge, where I had hoped we could go. It's been a great privilege to work with Chairman Feinstein. I like the idea we have an appropriations bill on the floor. This is the basic work of government. We ought to do this before we do anything else. And we can't have an appropriations bill to fund the basic work of government. People might say, can you do anything at all? So we've done our part. We've got the bill here, and I thank the Majority Leader for bringing it up, and I hope our colleagues will give us the chance to move forward with the bill this week, to bring their amendments to the floor. Let's debate on it. Let's vote on a final result. Let's pass it into law and do something that we can be proud of. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I rise to thank the Senator. Once again, it's been a great pleasure to work with you. And once again, I think we have a lot of this bill in common. We do have some points of difference. And I want to just say a little bit about my point of difference. I very much believe that I want to leave a world for my grandchildren where there is not danger from nuclear weapons or nuclear fuels. And today, I don't believe I can say that we have achieved that. I really don't believe that as permanent storage, and the Vice Chairman, the Ranking Member was correct. The head of the NRC did testify that in his view, the hot rods were safe for 100 years in those spent fuel pools. Well, you know, there were problems with spent fuel pools at Fukushima. I think as life goes on, we're going to see more of that. And we know that cladding has to be improved. And we know that perhaps the design basis of a new nuclear reactor has to meet events which are not necessarily predicted. Who would have thought one of the tsunamis was 47 feet tall that hit Fukushima? Who would ever believe that that could happen? But it can happen. I'm in California. We are in the Ring of Fire. And sure enough, there have been earthquakes in the southern tip of South America, in Asia, in Christchurch, New Zealand, and going right around. Very large earthquakes, approaching 9. And the concern is what happens next. So I think safety is a very real problem. And I think as we appropriate monies, we should be concerned with safety. The spent fuel pools were really designed to harbor hot rods for a relatively short period of time. The rods can be moved 5 to 7 years out. And then they're generally moved into passive storage and the dry casks. And the dry cask, it was thought, would be transported to repositories, either permanent repository or repositories on a regional basis, so under the supervision of the federal government. And I always felt that affecting that was an extraordinary challenge for us, and particularly when I learned that we were being fined an egregious amount of money because we can't do that every year. So my view is that we really have to get cracking and move that on. And the 5 things that we have in the bill, and I just lost my place in the bill, I think all take us to a much safer place with respect to nuclear activities. With respect to the small modular nuclear reactors, what they are is essentially less than 300 megawatts, modular, small reactors. I understand there's still problems with the cladding, but what was asked for was $192 million, not a loan, but a proposal to essentially subsidize up to 50% of the licensing costs of financial and technically viable corporations. These aren't small corporations. They're big corporations. And the department would have to pick 2 winners for the subsidy. That would leave at least 5 American companies out. I mean, this is a restricted bid. It doesn't include everybody, and it includes only one kind of reactor, a light water reactor. Who knows? Maybe others of the 5 are just as viable. So firms not receiving assistance would be substantially disadvantaged. The likely winners include these companies, Babcock and Wilcox. I have nothing against them. 2010 revenues exceeding $2.6 billion. Can't they afford their own licensing certification fees? Westinghouse, owned by the Japanese conglomerate Toshiba, which has $64 billion in assets and more than 200,000 employees. In other sectors, we don't invest federal dollars to help profitable private companies obtain safety licenses. We don't help Ford comply with crash test regulations, nor do we pay for Boeing to obtain FAA certification. So before we commit these monies, we should really seriously evaluate whether any company would change its decision about pursuing a license because of this. So I'm kind of at a different point in looking at subsidies. I really think that most subsidies by the federal government should just go, wherever they are, oil, gas, nuclear, ag, you name it, that we should not be subsidizing private industry. Now, there's also a fundamental contradiction in the nuclear industry's argument for funding small modular reactor licensing. On one hand, the industry argues that the market will be enormous and we can't afford to fall behind international competitors. On the other hand, these same industry experts argue that they won't develop and license a product unless government pays them to apply for an NRC license. They argue that the United States must provide each firm with more than $200 million to motivate them to pursue this business. Now, bottom line, the small modular reactor cannot be both a massive economic opportunity with the potential to change the way we power our economy and an opportunity that industry will not pursue unless the government pays them to do that. So I have real questions about funding this item. We'll have more to say about it as this goes on. I know it's popular. If there were a spent fuel policy, if we knew that we were going to go for regional repositories, that there was some limit to the storage of fuel at a site, 74 sites now, and with advanced modular reactors, this is more, because many people think the only way this can be cost competitive is you have to group these 2 together. So at a given site, you would have 5 or 6 small reactors, but you have the same spent fuel problem. Seems to me we need a place to put spent fuel. I am not opposed to nuclear if we can properly take care of its waste. So I wanted to respond when my distinguished ranking member raised this. We have had one meeting with the chairman of the Energy Committee, the ranking member of the Energy Committee, Senator Alexander, and myself, to discuss how to proceed toward a nuclear storage policy. I think we need to continue this. We're going to ask the Secretary to talk with us in December and then begin, and Senator Alexander's been great in doing this, put forward a little agenda of how to proceed toward this, so that I know he is in fact in good faith in suggesting it, and I do. He's always been a straight shooter. But it's just very hard for me to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to promote a whole new class of nuclear reactors when we don't have a place to dispose of hot, spent fuels that will be hot and dangerous for literally hundreds of years. And if we can move fast, I'm all for it. So I know the Senator wants to respond, and I welcome the debate.
I thank the Senator. I'm not going to respond at great length because I want to eventually find us in agreement about this. But I appreciate your points are very important and very good points. I think on safety of nuclear power, I think it's always important to start off by pointing out that a nuclear reactor is a big, complex operation, and obviously there's some risk to it. But nuclear power has the best safety record of any form of energy production in the United States. There's never been a death in connection with any one of our 104 civilian reactors. Hasn't been one with the more than 100 Navy reactors where we have sailors actually living on top of reactors. We've all heard about 3 Mile Island, which is the most important nuclear accident we've had in the United States, but no one was even hurt in 3 Mile Island. See, the senator from Pennsylvania is presiding today, and when I say that to people around the country, they say, what do you mean no one was hurt at 3 Mile Island? I mean, no one was even hurt. There have been thousands of tests on families who lived around there, and no one was even hurt, either from any kind of explosion or from radioactivity at a later time. So we always have to look for better ways to be safe. But we have that safe record, and we do have the chairman of the NRC saying that this used fuel is stored safely for 100 years. And we have our scientists telling us in 10 or 15 years we can find a way to recycle it. And within that time, we ought to find a place to put it. We'd have a place to put it if we could go ahead with Yucca Mountain, but that's been stopped for a variety of reasons, some of them political. Let's say they're all principled. But for whatever reason, it's stuck. So the other thing I would say is there's certain urgency about this. As the Senator said, 20% of our electricity is nuclear power, 70% of it clean. What if we didn't have that 20%? We don't have to look far to see. In Japan, they've shut down temporarily enough of their reactors as a result of Fukushima to be without 20% of their electricity. And what are they doing? Their car manufacturers have been working on the weekends. That's 5 million workers in Japan. Temperatures are turned to 82 during the summer heat. 22,000 people have been brought into the hospitals from heat stroke. The emperor and empress are wandering around the imperial palace with candlesticks and flashlights. I mean, we don't want a United States of America like that. This is an important part of our ability to create jobs and to have lots of low-cost electricity. We use 25% of all the electricity in the world in the United States. And as far as subsidies go, after we get through finding a place to put used nuclear fuel, maybe this is a second area on which the senator from California and I can work, which would be to do something about energy subsidies. Estimates are the federal government probably spends about $20 billion a year on energy subsidies of one kind or another. And Energy Information Administration did a study 3 years ago at where that money goes. And this is where it goes. Subsidies for wind dwarf everything else. It's not big oil, it's big wind. $18.82 per megawatt hour subsidy for wind turbines. $3.67 for solar. $1.36 for landfill gas. 67 cents per megawatt hour for hydroelectric. 18 cents for biomass, 12 cents for coal, and almost zero for nuclear. It's often cited the insurance program that the nuclear power plants have as a subsidy. Well, it's a federal law, but it never has cost the taxpayer a penny. And it simply requires all the nuclear operators to put in, I believe, $11 or $12 billion per reactor in case there's an incident. They all share in the result, which might be a pretty good way to deal with oil producers who are drilling in the Gulf. Make them all worry about each other's plant, not just their own. So I believe nuclear power is safe, and as far as subsidies go, I'd like to move some of those subsidies into the energy research column and maybe into reduce the debt column. In fact, reading the New York Times on Saturday, and I asked consent to put the story in the record, rich subsidies powering solar and wind projects, big rise in government aid, companies are virtually assured of profits. This is the New York Times. This isn't the conservative Washington, D.C. journal saying this. It's a very thorough article. It talks about something I've been concerned about for a long time. It said taxpayers and ratepayers are providing subsidies worth almost as much as the entire $1.6 billion cost of a solar plant halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco on a former cattle ranch. And it quotes the head of NRG, a very substantial company, saying, quote, "I've never seen anything that I've had to do in my 20 years in the power industry that involved less risk than these projects. It's just filling the desert with panels." From 2007 to 2010, federal subsidies jumped to $14.7 billion from $5.1 billion, according to a recent study. And it goes on and on. My own research shows that the Joint Tax Committee said that over the next 10 years, taxpayer funding for wind, which our Energy Secretary testified is a mature technology, will cost the taxpayers $26 billion over the next 10 years. Wouldn't that money be better spent on energy research, for clean energy, for finding ways to deal with used nuclear fuel, for getting a 500-mile battery, for getting an installed dollar kilowatt, or reducing the debt at a time that we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend? So I'm absolutely committed to working with Senator Feinstein on finding a way to deal with the problem of used nuclear fuel. We urgently need to do that. And we're fortunate that it's safe where it is while we do that. And I hope we can find a way to agree that over the next few years we can move ahead so we at least get started on small modular reactors. And I'm also willing to work with the chairman or anyone else, any other senator, who's willing to take a good hard look at energy subsidies of all kinds and say, okay, let's take a look at our own positions on that, especially in light of the budget deficit, and let's take that money and put some of it into energy research so we can get up to where we need to be and use the rest of it to reduce the debt. So this is a good discussion and one I look forward to continuing, and I'm delighted I have a chance to continue it with someone I respect as much as the senator from California.